Let me ask you a question. Have you ever raised a glass and thought, this is fine, but what if I was doing it like a bearded war god from the ninth century? No, just me? Cool. Well, buckle up anyway, because once you learn how the Vikings drank, your Friday night might start looking a little underwhelming. See, we tend to imagine Vikings as axe-wielding, monastery-pillaging maniacs. And yeah, that's fair. But what we don't talk about enough is what happened after the raid. The feast, the fire, the horn passed from hand to hand, the mead. Oh, the mead. Drinking in Viking culture wasn't just about getting tipsy and yelling "Skål" until you fall off your bench. It was ritual. It was community. It was how they honored their gods, their ancestors, their dead, their goats, and each other. It was how you proved your strength, recited your saga, and bonded with your crew before heading back out to sea the next morning with a hangover and a sword. And here's the kicker. They did it all without refrigeration, hops, kegs, solo cups, or bartender mustaches. They brewed everything by hand, aged it in clay jars, toasted in longhouses built from tree trunks. Basically, if you've ever complained about warm beer, you might not have made it in Viking times. So today we're cracking open the drinking horn and diving deep into how the Norse really threw down. What they drank, how they made it, how they stored it, and what kind of absolute chaos went down once the toasting started. Because if you're gonna raise a glass, why not do it like a Viking? Okay, now let's get one thing straight. The Vikings knew how to drink. Not in the let's grab a Bud Light and call it a night kind of way. No, these folks drank like their afterlife depended on it. Which, honestly, it kinda did. On the Viking menu, two glorious golden liquids, ale and mead. That's it. No lattes, no kombucha. Just the essentials. Boozy barley juice and fermented bee spit. And they loved every drop. Let's start with ale, the Viking version of beer. But don't picture your standard cold pint at the pub. Viking ale was thick, earthy, kind of like if a farm and a brewery had a baby and forgot to filter it. It was made from barley, water, and a pinch of herbs. No hops yet, that was a later invention. So this was beer in its most primal form, kind of like beer's caveman cousin who lifts stones for fun. The ale was brewed at home, by women mostly. That's right, the real brewers of Valhalla were Viking housewives. These ladies could run a farm, raise 5 kids, and still make a batch of ale strong enough to knock out a berserker. Now let's talk about the real star of the show, mead, aka liquid gold. This wasn't your average drink. Mead was sacred. It was royal. It was basically the Viking version of a vintage bottle of Dom Perignon, but made by bees. Made from honey, water, and wild yeast, mead was sweeter than ale and could sneak up on you faster than a raid on an unsuspecting monastery. Also, fun fact, mead might be one of the oldest alcoholic drinks in human history. We're talking 9,000 years of buzzing and boozing, folks. So when Vikings drank mead, they were basically sipping on ancestral tradition with a kick. In short, Vikings didn't need fancy cocktails or mixologists. Give them barley, honey, fire, and a drinking horn. Also, drinking horn tip. Don't try setting it down mid-toast. No flat bottoms. You drink it all or hold it till your arm falls off. That's the Viking way. Ale for the daily grind, mead for the epic moments, and both guaranteed to make your next feast 110% more dramatic. So how did the Vikings actually make this drinkable legend? Step 1. Malting. You take barley and soak it until it begins to sprout. Yes, you're basically growing a tiny plant just to murder it in hot air later. Once it starts to sprout, you dry it over fire, and boom, you've activated those enzymes that break down starch into sugar. It smells kind of like oatmeal. If oatmeal lived in a log cabin and chopped wood for fun. Next up, the mash. This is where you mix the roasted grain with hot water. Stir it like your life depends on it. Or at least your buzz does. You're trying to extract all the sweet, sugary goodness from the grain into the water. What you get is called wort. It looks like soup, smells like wet cereal, and tastes like something you'd politely spit out behind a tree. But it's important because this gross-looking sludge is the base for your ale. Now comes the boiling phase. You heat the wort until it bubbles like hell's cauldron, then add herbs. Because hops weren't a thing yet. Instead, they used what's called grute, a blend of bitter medicinal herbs like yarrow, sweet gale, and sometimes mushrooms. Flavor? Maybe. Psychoactive side effects? Possibly. Bragging rights? Definitely. Finally, the most magical and totally unpredictable part, fermentation. The Vikings didn't have packets of yeast. Instead, they just left the mixture out and let nature handle it. Wild yeast in the air would land in the wort and start turning those sugars into alcohol. One day you get ale, the next day, sour grain slime. But hey, if it tasted even vaguely alcoholic, it was good enough for Olaf and the boys. Not all ale was created equal. There was your everyday table ale, lighter, safer than water, and served to everyone, including kids. Yup, Viking toddlers drank mild ale. No Capri Suns in the 9th century. Then there was the strong stuff, saved for warriors, special guests, and long nights when you wanted to make bold, questionable decisions. Some households even spice things up by adding birch bark, fruit, or ash, because nothing says Saturday night like a hint of tree. So we've talked about the ale, but how did the Vikings make mead? It all starts with honey. And no, they didn't buy it in cute little plastic bear bottles. Vikings had to find wild hives, smoke the bees out, and steal their life's work with a grin. Bees were seriously valuable. Honey wasn't just for sweetening your bread. It was currency, medicine, and the key to getting gloriously tipsy in honor of Thor. Next, you mix that golden goo with water. Now, ratios mattered. Too little honey, and it's weak. Too much? You might time travel. But wait, there's more. They didn't stop at just honey and water. Vikings were the original mixologists. Now comes the part where you wait and pray to Odin that it doesn't turn into poison. The fermentation process was hands-off. No added yeast, no temperature control, no timers. Just wild yeast floating in the air. And good vibes. Depending on the batch, it could take weeks to months to fully ferment. The longer you waited, the stronger and smoother it got. Oh, and let's not forget, mead wasn't just a drink, it was straight up divine. In Norse mythology, there's something called the mead of poetry. Made from the blood of a wise man and mixed with honey, this mead gave the drinker the gift of poetry, wisdom, and next-level charisma. Mead was often made in larger batches and saved for big moments. It wasn't your everyday drink, it was a treasure. And if you had aged mead to serve guests, that meant one thing. You had status. But where, when, and why did the Vikings serve drinks? It's not like they had a local bar down the street. Welcome to the Viking longhouse. Basically a cross between a medieval pub, a community center, and your wild uncle's basement on Super Bowl Sunday. This was where everything happened. Feasts, meetings, deals, oaths, toasts, gossip, games, poetry, and a whole lot of drinking. When did Vikings drink? Whenever they could. They raised horns at weddings. They drank after raids. They toasted the harvest. And let's be honest, probably the dog who chased off wolves last week. At the head of the table was the chieftain, or host, who basically ran the party. His job? Make sure no one left thirsty, insulted, or stabbed. Toasts were done in a specific order. The ancestors. After that, friends, the living, the dead, the host, and maybe even the chickens. You didn't have a personal mug. Nope. One massive horn got passed around. You drink your share, say your toast, and pass it to the next warrior, poet, or guy who's clearly had too much. To drink like a Viking meant knowing when to laugh, when to fight, and most importantly, when to sit your horn down and shut up. This is all great, but what methods did they have to use to store their booze? It's not like they had refrigerators or fancy bottling techniques. Let's start with ale. Here's the thing. Viking ale wasn't built to last. It was unfiltered, unpasteurized, and definitely uncarbonated. So they didn't store it long term. Ale was brewed in small batches, and it was meant to be consumed quickly. When it came to containers, the Vikings went full rustic. Clay pots, wooden kegs, and sometimes even animal bladders were used to seal in the good stuff. To seal the containers, they used beeswax, pitch, or tightly woven cloth. The goal? Keep out air, bugs, and accidental rat intrusions. And without refrigerators, how did they keep things cool? Earth cellars. It's like a Viking wine fridge, just made of dirt. In colder months, they'd even use snowbanks to chill their booze. Mead was a different story. This stuff was born to age. Properly sealed and stored, it could last months, even years. Knowing how to store your booze was just as important as knowing how to brew it. One leaky lid or a little too much warmth, and your precious drink could turn into sour sludge. So you've got your mead in hand, your ale flowing, and the horn's already made its third lap around the table. Now the real fun begins because Viking drinking didn't end with toasts. Oh no, that was just the warm-up. Vikings partied like it was Ragnarok Eve, and they brought their A game. Songs, games, roasts, wrestling, and enough bragging to make a modern influencer blush. Let's start with the heart of it all, the toast. In Viking society, a toast wasn't just cheers and a clink. It was a speech, a moment, a ritual. You stood up, raised your horn high, and probably that guy 2 seats down who once saved your goat from drowning. And yes, there was an order. You toasted the first, Odin, Thor, Freyr, then your ancestors, then your living kin, and then maybe yourself, if your ego was warmed up enough. Now here's the twist. You didn't even get your own drink. Vikings passed around a single horn, filled to the brim. When it landed in your hands, you had 2 options. Finish it or hold it awkwardly until you did. No flat bottom. You either drank it all or risked shaking through an entire speech with your arm cramping. Once the toasting started, the flyting began. Flyting was like Viking freestyle rap battles, but with more poetic insults and fewer beats. You stood across from your rival and lobbed verses at them, accusing them of cowardice, ugliness, or goat-related shame. The crowd would cheer, laugh, and occasionally groan if your rhyme game was weak. Loser status? Official and public. Winner? Bragging rights and possibly a second helping of mead. And then came the games. Vikings loved games, rowdy, noisy, often ridiculous games. They arm wrestled, they played dice, they competed to see who could lift the heaviest rock without collapsing or herniating something. Imagine trying to impress your future in-laws while balancing a boulder and not spilling your drink. That's Viking dating. And yes, sometimes the games turned into brawls. You insult someone's toast, make fun of their saga, or say Loki's name one too many times. But most of the time, these parties were controlled chaos. Because even when it got loud and messy, the longhouse had a rhythm. A Viking feast was a dance of drink, honor, and absurd storytelling. Speaking of stories, enter the Skalds. These were the poets, historians, and full-time hype men of the feast. A good skald could turn your fishing trip into an epic saga. A bad skald might immortalize the time you tripped into the fire pit during a toast to Freya. They sang. They recited. They exaggerated. And if they liked you, they made you a legend. If not, let's just say your great-grandkids would be laughing at your expense. Now, all of this, the toasting, the games, the songs, it wasn't just to pass the time. This was how Vikings connected. This was how they celebrated victories, mourned losses, and bound themselves together as families, clans, and comrades. To drink like a Viking was to speak from the gut, sing from the soul, and celebrate the chaos of being alive in a brutal, beautiful world. So, yeah, they didn't have DJs or disco balls, but they had roaring fires, pounding fists on tables, and voices raised in song. Horns in hand, stories flowing, and legends being born with every toast. So, there you have it. Drinking like a Viking wasn't just about getting buzzed and yelling at goats, though, let's be honest, that probably happened more than once. It was a way of life. From the moment the barley hit the pot to the last echoing toast in a smoky longhouse, Vikings used their drinks to celebrate life, test their limits, and bring their communities together. So, next time you're at a party, raising a glass with friends, or just sipping something sweet on your own, raise a toast to the old gods. Say Skål, and remember, you're not just drinking. You're part of a tradition that goes back over 1,000 years. And if you enjoyed this journey into Norse drinking culture, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more Viking madness, and plunder the comments with your best historical toast. Or let us know what you would have put in your mead recipe. Until next time, drink like a Viking, toast like a poet, and maybe don't fight your guests with an axe.